Life Over Coffee. Conversations for transformation.
Hello, everyone. This is Rick Thomas with Life Over Coffee. Thank you so much for joining me. For this episode, I have Lucas Miles, and I'm not going to get into his bio here. I'm going to allow him to unpack that as we go along for the sake of time, and I really want to get into this discussion. But I will let you know about a book that I do highly recommend. It is called Woke Jesus. It came out in the summer of 2022 or 2023, Lucas?
23.
Just came out. So the paint is still dripping on this book. I do want to ask this overarching pastoral question because in our world, we interact with pastors all the time, and they are just busy people. And there's a couple of different philosophies that are floating out there. One of those is just preach the word and everything will be okay. Stay true to God's word. Let's be expositional preachers, et cetera, et cetera. I'm all in on that. But the world doesn't play nice like they used to, or maybe it'd be better to say they were more subtle than they are now. They have always been encroaching into our domain. And so it's no longer where we can ignore this problem that's happening. And so my question to you, well, there's a couple of questions here. Let me start with this one. How do you balance being a pastor at a local church, and now you're ever growing into this cultural field and relevancy that I think is essential? Now, by the way, I'm all for what you're doing, so this is not a cynical question at all, but having the heart of a pastor and interacting with pastors, it's a hard weight for them to carry. And there's several questions I'm going to ask you about this, but first of all, how do you balance the life that you have now?
Yeah, this has been it's been a skill I've developed over time, and it's also probably a grace that is realized over time, over my life. And that is that God has, I think he gives ability. This is what grace is. It's God's ability working in our life to fulfill the call that he has for us. There's people that are a lot busier than I am. I only have my own context to put that through. My wife is definitely a partner, fully in this with me. We strategize together, dream together, work on things together. She's employed through the ministry and has been very instrumental in a lot of the strategies and systems that we've been able to put in place. We have a great team. And honestly, I didn't used to do this very well. I've probably always been as multifaceted in terms of my interests and passions, but there was a shift that we made, and actually we came across an individual named Dr. Dean Radke, and Dean has a leadership system specifically for pastors that saved our life. It saved our ministry, it saved our marriage, and when we really, what we would say, learned how to lead God's way, everything changed for us. When Jesus was, pushing himself and his disciples were worried about him and they're going, "Teacher, you got to slow down. You got to eat something." He responds and says that I have food to eat that you know nothing of. And he says, my food, my sustenance is to do the will of the Father. And they're all wondering if somebody slipped him a Snickers bar, behind the scenes. And, Jesus was fed as he was going because he fulfilled the call on his life. And I think that when you find that sweet spot where you're doing not just what you love to do, but you're doing what you were created to do, that charges me up. And it doesn't mean I don't need to rest or I don't need to take a break, but I'm fired up every single day. And I only get one shot at this, one life to live, and I'm not going to leave anything on the field. That's kind of the philosophy that I run with.
Yeah, and when you say ministry, what are you talking about at the church or what you're doing?
So we're structured. We're structured maybe a little bit differently than some other church-centric models, and that is that we have what we call a network model. And so I am the president of what we call the Influence Network. And within the Influence Network are a lot of different ministries and initiatives that we have. One of those ministries is the local church. So I'm kind of the lead pastor at the local church at this time, as well as the president of the network. So I teach here about 3 times a month or so. And then, I'm on the road a lot throughout the week. I'm able to kind of orbit some of the other, times as the staff kind of picks up the pieces in between things. But we've structured ourselves in such a way to anticipate that and really, work around that. So we have the American Pastor Project is under that umbrella. We've just recently partnered with Walt Heyer, who's a kind of a famous detransitioner. He's in his early 80s now, but he lived as a quote unquote woman between the ages of 42 and 50. And so we've partnered with him, and we've basically acquired with his continued leadership over his ministry called Sex Change Regret. .com. And so we are now running that as well. We have, several other initiatives here. We have a daycare campus. We have other things. So all of this is underneath this influence umbrella. I have some for-profit things that I do as well. But that's, when I say ministry, it's really holistic. It feels, when I describe what I do, it feels like I need 8 business cards, but in my mind, I just have one job, and that is to really to be a strategic, and if I can say this without trying to bring any theology with it, I just mean it by nature of what the word is, an apostolic voice. And I don't mean that by, hey, I'm Apostle Miles. I mean that by, I'm concerned and feel like my gifting is looking at the big picture of ministry, the high level, the doctrine, the direction of the church. How do we steer the church out of error, left or right, and really be able to advance the gospel both here domestically and around the world?
Thank you for clarifying on the apostolic thing. Our people will stop twitching now, and they do understand what you're saying. All right. So one of the reasons I'm asking this question is because, well, the culture is encroaching now. They are hyper evangelistic in what they're doing. They were more subtle decades ago. What we're experiencing today is nothing that's new. In fact, you talk about it in your book. I come from a biblical counseling world, so I understand the DSM nomenclature, and I know that, for example, in 2013, they changed gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. They did that to shift the argument away from I have a problem to you are causing my confusion. But that also goes back to the earlier DSMs as well. And this is what I try to communicate to people, that this is not new. It is just something that's been growing up through the sod for many decades and now is full blown. Yeah. But one of the reasons I'm asking you the question about your lifestyle and the choices that you're making ministerially is because the pastors do feel the weight of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my concern would be that pastors would what would Lucas do that compare themselves to you? So you have and again, you're not going to say this, but I will. You have a high intellect. You have a high capacity. You used the word multifaceted a while ago. And so that seems to be part of your personality as well. And then from an infrastructure perspective, you have a church network that really has a worldview that, I'm assuming now, based on what you said, that they understand what's going on here and they're all on board with these multifaceted purposes that you have. Now, that's important for pastors to understand, that everybody can't do what you do, but we can applaud it. Now, my second question is, what would you say to the pastor who feels overwhelmed and it's like, how can I add this into my sermon diet? How do I keep my people up to speed on worldview, especially if they've been in this perspective, which I don't disagree with, of just preaching the word? Sure. Again, I'm okay with that, believe in that, but there is something happening out here that's not going to leave us alone anymore. And so what, one, encouragement would you give that person that feels overwhelmed? And then two, practically, how can they add or begin to communicate to bring their people up to speed? Because in my world, Christians, generally speaking, are not up to speed on what's going on culturally, specifically as your book, Woke Jesus, outlines.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So Look, and I think that you described very well where a lot of people have found themselves in the culture today, and where a lot of pastors specifically have found themselves. First, I mean, there's multiple issues here, and I think that it's important to sort of unravel the tangled, the tangled knots that we have in order to come to solutions. So issue number one is, I think a lot of pastors are overwhelmed because pastors like to be needed. And I say that as a pastor, I say that as a recovering people pleaser, that we like to be needed, and that that there are habits that we develop in order to kind of be the savior of people in these things. And I remember when I started shifting our model with more of a focus on discipleship, more of a focus on equipping, more of a focus on empowering other leaders, rather than kind of being that central figure doing everything myself. Because it's easy as a pastor to be like, I have 119 things on my to-do list, and I'm the only person who can do them, right? But the reality is that's not really true. There are some things on my to-do list that right now I don't have anybody else to give those to, but I know that's only because I've not developed leaders around me sufficiently to be able to take on those things and delegate the work of the ministry in that way. And so the onus still remains on me for that development. And so we have to change, set aside politics for a second. We have to change our view of what our job is. Our job is not to be the lead performer. Our job is to really be the lead developer and trainer within our organization, calling out people's, gifts, callings, character in such a way that they can fulfill, that we are, it's that Ephesians 4 model, that the job of the apostle, pastor, teacher, prophet, evangelist is to train up God's people and for works of service. And then that, the progressive church loves that line, because they're like, that's what we're just supposed to be, the hands and feet of Jesus, none of this other stuff. But he goes on to say, it says, so that they don't get blown around by every wind. They don't, they don't fall apart. There's an equipping that happens there. So that's philosophically, I think, a place we have to start. The second part of that is, somewhere along the line, I think pastors have bought a lie that these topics that are happening in culture right now, abortion, sexuality, marriage, even national sovereignty and open borders. So we could talk about free market, versus socialism or something. That somewhere they bought this lie that those are political topics, and that's intentional. Those that are pushing this cultural Marxist agenda, they want the pastors to think these are political, and they want to be able to come to them and say, hey, you're not supposed to use the church for a political thing, while all the while they're using their churches that have bought this agenda for political manipulation. Now, what I tell pastors is, and the same thing I think that the Lord, asked Adam and Eve in the garden, is, who told you were naked? I would say, who told you these things were political? Who told you that abortion is a political issue first and foremost? Who told you that even national sovereignty and border, control is a political issue first and foremost? Yes, it has political ramifications. These things have political ramifications, but they start as theological and spiritual issues. Our job as pastors is to teach the full counsel of the Word of God in such a way that we're equipping the issues. In fact, if I'll end with this, is that I think that this is possibly one of the only generations of the church that has been unwilling to talk about heresies, even identifying people by name of what is going on in culture. If you look, I'm a student of church history. You look back to early patristic history. I mean, a lot of the books were against the Donatists, against the Manichees, against the Gnostics. They were writing things to clarify the Christian view by showing what they were standing against in opposition to false ideas that rose up. This has been the job of the pastor since the church began. It's still the job of the pastor, but a lot of pastors have shrugged that responsibility, and they're failing really to live out their full calling.
Yeah, who was it? Alexander the metal worker.
Paul warns about him. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I was always curious. I was always curious about him. Like, man, what did he do? It's like
that passage actually freed. When I wrote my book, The Christian Left, I gave it to, which was my previous book, gave it to several trusted people that know me well, knew the material well, and as well as the publisher at that time. And they all came back on the first draft with the same comment. They said, Lucas, this is what we need. This is perfect. This is so timely. This is going to be bigger than you can even realize. but you left a chapter out. And they all said the same thing in their own kind of way. And I went to each of them. What do you mean by that? And they said, you have to tell us who. And I didn't want, I mean, I wrote that book came out in 2001. I wrote it in 2019, 2020, finished it during the start of the pandemic. And I didn't want to say names. I didn't want I wanted to talk about issues without naming names. And I was studying the scriptures, and I actually came across that passage where Paul addresses, Alexander the metalworker, and, talks about he's done great harm. He's, causing harm to others. And I thought, you know what, if you don't say the names, people will still get into situations where they think this person's safe because it has the word church or it has the word Christian behind them, or they have the word pastor in front of their name, when really they're a wolf in sheep's clothing in this way. And so I don't say that because I like smearing people, but I address a lot of names in both the Christian Left and in the newest book, Woke Jesus. But it's for the purpose of really helping guide the church to a greater understanding of wisdom. In fact, a lot of these people, I did extend, some sort of opportunity to reach out to them, to talk to them. Didn't really have a lot take me up on that. But I want to see people restored. And I really believe it's not too late for woke Christians, because a lot of them have good intentions to find their way back to Christian orthodoxy. And that's my prayer. I'm not out here because I hate people. I'm out here because I love people, trying to steer them away from these false ideas.
Yeah, I'll have these books in the show notes for those of you who are watching or listening to the podcast version. In 2016, he had Good God, and then The Christian Left was next. And then the book that I really want to talk about is Woke Jesus. But Lucas, why is there this Christian propriety or discretion? You said this generation may be the only generation in church history that has a propriety to where we just don't call names. And of course, we're not talking about calling names like Westboro Baptist Church, where we're just out there and just being blatantly not just weird, but being antagonistic, but in a sincere way of warning people of things that are wrong. How did we get into this mindset where we've taken Christian propriety and it's expanded its borders to where we just don't talk about people in the right Christian ways?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that have led to that. I'm probably still formulating, some of my, full evaluation of that. But it's or analysis, but it's to start with, this is really one of the first generations that where the church is on display at the way in which it is internally in terms of what we're doing and saying. We could look back to maybe C.S. Lewis's day or G.K. Chesterton's day, and you might have a pastor who's quoted in a newspaper, or you might have a published sermon in written form. But it was you didn't have the access to video at the level that we do now. You didn't have access to live stream like we do now. Now anybody, Washington Post, New York Times, anybody can watch a pastor's sermon on their live stream, whether they show up or not, and instantly be able to comment on it. And it's interesting because in the past, you would have Christians that would comment on maybe doctrine within the church, but now the church is having to, justify its doctrine to a post-Christian world on why the things that we're saying and offering are true, why they are morally, upright, these things. That hasn't happened since Rome. When you look at what happened in Rome in the first, 2,000 years ago, in the first several hundred years of Christianity, initially it was kind of just dismissed as a cult. As it started gaining some momentum, it was still dismissed by Rome for a lot of different reasons, but Christians were accused of things that, if I can back up, 20 years ago, Christians were viewed as holier than thou, goody two shoes, too righteous for the rest of us. None of that was true, but that was the ethos about Christianity, right. Kind of the framework for it. Now Christians are villains. We're insurrectionists. We are we're creating, those that didn't get vaccinated or don't wear a mask are harming their brothers and sisters, are spreading diseases. They are, Christians are viewed as bigots because of our view of, what they would view as a limited view of sexuality and marriage, gender and these things. And there's accusations against Christians that we haven't seen since Rome, because since the time of Rome, and really since the time of Constantine, Christianity successfully won over the world, at least the majority of the Western world, and convinced it that this is the most moral, upright, true, faith that there ever could be. And it was generally accepted. Even those that didn't follow it still recognized the truth and validity of it and honored it and respected it. That's been lost in the last 100 years. And so now we're at a place to where, once again, Christianity is starting to be villainized. And to me, that's a precursor, if you know church history, to eventual persecution.
Right.
But I think that has caused pastors and people to be a lot more careful about what they say, to be a lot more guarded about what they say. I just had for the first time a Hollywood celebrity speak out against me. I've never had that before. I know other pastors have had that. That was new to me. I woke up to it and saw the message, publicly. And so, we have to deal with those things in a different way. And I think that those that haven't really developed the skin for it and developed the internal constitutional, makeup or internal, spiritual integrity to walk through that, they just weren't prepared, and they're not prepared for it. And so it's easier to stay silent.
Yeah, true. We have a bigger megaphone than we've ever had before, and the world is smaller. Of course, we're going to have more community, as Steve Jobs is going to bring us all together. But you can't bring 8 billion totally depraved people together and expect us to play nice with each other. And so that is a problem. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when we had 3 TV stations, and they signed off at 1 o'clock after playing the Star Spangled Banner, and we had one newspaper, and you're not going to get your voice in the newspaper. That would be rarefied air. But now everybody has a megaphone. Everybody can, say what they want to. So you're talking about a person who's a habituated people pleaser. As you know, the terminology is the fear of man in Proverbs 29:25. And so you have struggled with fear of man. You talk about thicker skin. But what was the process for you to overcome your fear of man? Because this is an issue. It's self-censoring in our culture. We are afraid. We don't want to get into litigious issues. And then you wake up one morning and you find some Hollywood actor saying something about you, but you're continuing to step into it. And so what was the process of you to overcome the fear of man and say, I'm just going to do this as you appropriate the grace of God into your life? What was that transition like for you, going from fear of man to being a courageous, outspoken individual?
Let me, and maybe it's your counselor background here. You're going to draw more out of me than, I just feel like I'm in your office there and we're talking. I forget that the world's watching right now, but let me be a little bit more transparent.
It's just us.
Okay, perfect. I'll be more transparent here that look, I think that it's easy to be on an interview like this and just always, well, we got it all together. This is why it all works. And then, everybody else is out there going, I wish I could do that. The reality is that there are still times where you have to do it afraid, but
say it again.
You have to do it afraid. You have to, good. You have to just go, you know what? It doesn't matter what I feel right now. It doesn't matter the emotions that I'm having right now. It doesn't matter. I can think of 12 reasons to stop or not to say this or not to address this about people in my family or extended family, or how are they going to think? Are they going to think I'm talking about them? I mean, there's all those things that you can do. Or, this person's at church in the front row this week. Can I really say this right now? Are they going to leave? Are they going to stop giving? Sometimes you have to be that Gideon figure, and you have to do it afraid. When God looks at you, the angel says, arise, valiant warrior, and you're hiding in a wine press. And I think that that's where a lot of pastors have found themselves at. And I would say, you know what, even if you're hiding in a wine press, arise, because the Lord sees something in you, and you can start doing it afraid, and you'll be amazed at what can happen. For me, a big part of that was broken. I don't know if you ever break it completely, but it was broken in me. In 2015, 2016, I lost about 40 to 50% of my church in over about 3-4 week period. Very quick period of time. I used to always joke that you can't ruin a church in 1 week. And, I've changed my thoughts on that, because you can. And what happened was I committed to doing a series because of some of the issues I saw locally, because some churches were drifting strong into progressive ideology. I'm in South Bend, Indiana, Mayor Pete Buttigieg country. And I started seeing the influence on churches here, and churches that were getting really pretty wacky. And he had a strong following at that time in our area. I did an 8-week series on establishing a biblical worldview about kind of major hot button topics. And this is sort of leading up to an election, but we weren't endorsing candidates. I wasn't wearing a red hat or anything on the stage. I mean, this was just basic biblical analysis of what does the Bible have to say about, sanctity of life, about socialism versus free market. What's it have to say about things like, marriage, sexuality, gender issue wasn't as big as it is now, but certainly was starting to rear its head. So we did 8 weeks of these topics. And normally I would do a lot of verse by verse teaching. Like, for instance, we went through the entire book of Romans on a Sunday morning, very expository, but I kind of paused on that and did this series, and we lost 40 to 50% of our church in a very short period of time. With that, wow. 40, 50% of our revenue. And it was, I mean, at that moment, I've never had so much temptation to stop the ministry and quit the ministry as I had at that time. And, our expenses were such that we were counting on that full group being there every week, our payroll, our building expenses, all the things. And I was living what the pastors out there watching this who aren't addressing the topics are afraid of happening. Well, see, if you do that, this is going to happen. And what I would tell you is that I would do it over again and probably be even stronger on these issues if I did it again. And we grew back since, and we went from that straight into COVID. So, I mean, we had a period of time of very, lean years, but the Lord got us through. And, in the last 18 months, our ministry has grown probably 4 times the size of what it is in scope and finances. There's a level of stability. There's a level of advancement now that we're having. We're attracting, national level staff and strategic partners in these things. And God has elevated, what it is that we're doing. And I really believe that it's not because of any great thing in us, but there is a part that faithfulness plays, and a willingness to be obedient, even when it's hard, even at the risk of personal peril, that God always, lifts people up in those situations and settings. And so that for me was something died in me. And I got to the point to where I just wasn't afraid anymore.
All right. So when you began as an unregenerate human being, God saved you, and then you move into pastoral ministry. You can't predict this path. This is not a story that you're writing. And so how did it evolve from pastoral ministry to being more culturally outspoken? What were some tipping points for you, or some things that God did in you to motivate you to expand more, step into a greater usefulness or capacity that you have?
It's interesting. I mean, by no means could I have written out the path that I'm on. But I do feel like that there was, whether God was showing me that, or just something kind of within me, innate within me, that was kind of, that I was moving towards these things. I didn't have language for all of it, but when we first started our church, it would have been, we planted in 2004, and I'm still the senior pastor of the church that I planted in 2004. It's rare, and I am very aware of that, for somebody to be in a church that long, and especially when I started the church when I was 24 years old. So this is actually our 19th year of ministry. Next year will be our 20th year of ministry. And, that's not the norm for people today. I think that, God gave me some early vision and clues. When we first planted the church, I used to always carry around, this before you had these things on your cell phone. I had a little mini voice recorder, and the little bitty tapes. I'm sure as a counselor you probably use those.
Micro cassette. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I would carry that thing around and just speak kind of vision into this, things I felt like the Lord was kind of putting in me and that we were trying to do. And it's crazy because a lot of the things that I was speaking very early on over our ministry and that I had, that God was kind of giving me a vision for, we've seen come to pass. And I think that as a visionary, we of course would look to a scripture where, write down the vision so that a herald can run with it, that, and without vision, people perish. That's always been a very conscious thing for me, is sort of creating and shaping that vision in such a way that or communicating the vision in such a way that people can really get on board with it. But we had a whole kind of multifaceted picture pretty early on of what we were building towards. I, in some ways, knew I didn't start the Influence Network. I came on. I'm the second generation leader of this. Our founder actually just passed away a few years ago as his health started declining. He came to me and asked me early on if I would be willing to step in that role. And so I've had some time to kind of on-ramp to this, and very thankful for the foundation that he laid and the vision there. But I always knew that there was a couple pieces that were missing. And one of those is this kind of cultural arm that we have and really addressing these issues that are happening. It's very easy to call that political. I don't see it as political. I see it more as a cultural aspect to it. But it's, God has surprises, and he keeps opening up new opportunities and paths. And I think that, the church, I've said it this way a lot. I used to say the church, and we hear this all the time, the church is a hospital for the sick. And really felt like the Lord showed me that if the church is a hospital for a sick, that's a problem, because that means that the whole church, essentially is a quarantine zone. And what I've since learned is that the church is a city on a hill, and a good city has a great hospital system. But if the whole city's a hospital, you got a problem. And so, we've really tried to embrace that, to create healthy people, healthy relationships. I'm needed a lot less as a local pastor than I ever was, not because we don't have any problems, but because we have a lot more people equipped to be able to minister to issues than what we ever had previously before. And it's allowed me to really be able to rise up and address some of these things on a national level that I don't think that the typical local pastor feels like they would even have time to do. I've done probably, 250 interviews this year. I know that's not normal. But God's given me a grace for it, and the team really here to allow me to do those things, and I don't take it lightly.
Yeah,
this is a lot more myopic than I expected here, Rick. So I appreciate that.
You're comparable to a WWE wrestler. They wrestle about 250 times a year, and I've always found that to be phenomenal. Whether you're wrestling or doing interviews,
well, I'll tell you who the king of this is. Love him or hate him, David Copperfield is said to do over 500 shows a year. So he does 2 a day, all the time. And I see people in the world like that, I don't know anything about his relationship with the Lord or anything like that, but I've never heard him talk about it. And I think, look, if people in the world can move at that pace, then I just think a lot of the church has been, I don't even want to say lazy, because I don't think it's a works issue. It's we haven't embraced the grace that is actually available to us to do more through Christ than we ever could on our own. And we've relied on self so much. And I hear so many Christians talking about how tired they are and how they don't have any time and all these sorts of things. And I always kind of just, shrug at that, because it to me, when I look at all he's done for my life, how could I not give him as much as I can? Not to the point that, you want to run out and have a heart attack because you stressed yourself out. But again, if you're doing this in him, I think there's ways to do it to where the stress is not the emotion that you're leading with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And the only question I would have for David Copperfield, or my favorite WWE wrestler, is, or maybe you, who cares for your soul, and how is your marriage? Those are
Yeah.
the things that I'm very in tune to, because
Yep.
my life is similar to yours, not nationally, but super busy. And I have a strong work ethic, and also motivated by the passion that, I mean, God saved me, enough said, end of
Sure.
story. And so I want to go out and just, serve the Lord in any way that I can. But I also know that behind that, there has to be a strong marriage, and somebody has to be caring for my soul and speaking into
Yeah.
my life. We
Yeah, yeah.
men can Lewis and Clark our lives, across the 48 states, and lose our families and not do well in our souls, and all of those types of things. And so those are the questions that I have for high energy people
Yeah.
like you, me, David Copperfield, and WWE wrestler.
But look, you have to be intentional about that. And there's seasons where we've done that better than others. I think that the season I'm in right now, I'm very consciously aware that in the realm in which the Lord has been opening up for me, the type of people that I've been running with, the level of relationships that I have, I don't take any of that for granted. And I've seen the pitfalls of other people. They let it go to their head. They make it more about, prestige or prominence or wealth or something like that, than really, biblical influence. It starts, draining their marriage or creating conflict and chaos. And, as my wife and I, we've been on this journey together, and we both have people in our life that we can be honest with, that we can be, very transparent, and hopefully even the audience would see some of that model even in this conversation here, with that. But you have to have those people that are willing to be honest with you back, call you when they think that you're, that you're kind of maybe getting off track a little bit. And really that you're accountable to. And we always, but none of us are above accountability as believers. And so, Christy and I think that our relationship is, potentially better than it's ever been. It doesn't mean it's not without sacrifice. We've sacrificed a lot to be where we are at right now. And we know that there's more sacrifice ahead. But I'm thankful. I had a board member this year that said, "Hey, Lucas, go on vacation. Go on vacation and make it 2 weeks, and I'm so thankful for that, because I didn't realize probably how much we needed it until I was sitting there, down in Clearwater and going, hey, this is the right decision, and you come back and you're ready to jump back in, so it's so important.
Yeah. So Woke Jesus. The other two books are Good God and the Christian Left. And again, we'll have these links. Plus, you mentioned earlier, and I will talk about that later, the American Pastor Project, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, so woke is this ambiguous, leaderless amoeba that it's like Antifa. I mean, it's not definable. It's just this blob that's out there. And so what is your most succinct definition of woke? What does it mean?
Yeah. And first of all, it's intended to be undefinable. Wokeism is really nothing more than a euphemism for cultural Marxism. And to some degree, I think that we should, even though this is the title of my book, I think the more we can get away with just, away from calling this wokeism and just calling it what it is, it's Marxism. I think that the clearer the philosophical and ideological enemies, will become. This is it's based upon Marx's ideas. It's based upon critical theory. Behind this is sort of this oppressor versus oppressed framework. And it's manifested itself in different areas. So, for instance, we have critical race theory. That's probably most closely identified, at least, has been and most identified with this woke ideology, diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera, that we see from that. But now, very quickly, the DEI stuff is sort of, you're seeing people cancel the DEI programs. It's getting exposed. It's like once that the world catches on to that's where Marxism is trying to come in at, then they're going to jump to and double down in a different area. And now we're seeing critical, queer theory is sort of the main thing. And that's being pushed. And that it's sort of this, that all straight people are systemically oppressing, anybody who's got a divergent view of sexuality. And so we're seeing churches, well, if you really want to love like Jesus did, you have to accept all people. And their whole service now has just become, this kind of, rainbow, fest and everything else that's happening. And they're defending that with verses in scripture that they're using as propaganda. In the future, might be something else. We've already heard people talk about critical fat theory as a serious thing, that skinny people are systematically oppressing, people that are obese. And that's just why airplane seats are skinny as they are, because, we really hate people who are obese and we want to make sure that they're miserable and that they have to pay more and all these things. And it just keeps looking for ways to pit people against each other, to create chaos and division in society for the purpose of breaking things down, dismantling the family, dismantling, truth, dismantling, gender and marriage, and dismantling religion, in order to get to the point to where this phoenix of this communist utopia can rise from the ashes of the free market in the Western world and really show the world what truth, is supposed to look like from a communist viewpoint. And it's insidious, it's complex, it's hard to wrap your mind around. But all of that is intentional because it's easier to hide in plain sight the more confusing that they make it.
Yeah, and I think that's good if we say cultural Marxism, because that's not angel of light stuff. Woke is more like the angel of light, and it can come in deceptively. And so if we can, in the counseling world, that's what you want to do. If someone says, I'm frustrated, James would say that you're murdering, you do not have, and so you murder. And once you can bring clear labels to what is happening, then people's minds just open up and they see it. And it's essential that we communicate that way. Woke, it sounds neither good nor bad. There's no way to describe it. But when again, cultural Marxism, what do you think their agenda is?
I think that, ultimately, I've said it this way, that, obviously within Christianity, we talk of the Trinity. And most Christians have a concept of what that means, of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the unity of the three in one. There are trinities within woke ideology or Marxist ideology, and the way that's playing out today is, I always say that the method or the place of worship for the Marxist, for radical progressive, is the environment. And you will see, all the attempts. Now we have, critical climate theory is all focused on preserving what they hold to be the sanctuary of the environment. In Christianity, we are called to steward the environment because God placed us here and we have a responsibility over it, but it's never to worship it. And that's condemned if we start worshiping the created things over the creator. Within this kind of woke Marxist, movement that we have, there is a worship of the environment that's actually taking place. It's shifting that. The method of worship within Christianity, we have praise, singing songs, we have prayer, we have different things within, this sort of Marxist revolution. The method of worship in many cases is sexuality. That is how worship is done. It's that free expression is their picture of worship. And ultimately the God of this Marxist movement is the state. It's statism. And to go against the worship of this God, to reject any of its ideas, any of its mandates or edicts, is to be seen as, essentially godless or an atheist. And this is what Romans used to call Christians. They were called atheists because they didn't worship all the gods of Rome. And we're seeing that repeat today in kind of a unique way. And this is, I think, their objective is to silence any other voice that contradicts this push towards statism. And it's I call it a rebuilding of the Tower of Babel. That in the same way the Tower of Babel was a place where all of the people had the same heart and mind and spoke the same language, and they were all moving in the same direction. God divided that. Why? Because what we can kind of perceive in the passage is it appears to be a tower that is actually a tower of rebellion. They were creating a place to go up to the heavens, basically to get above the water line in case God were to ever, go back on his word and flood the earth again. God saw this as a tower of rebellion. He wasn't just, seeing some sort of construction wonder and, decided to go stomp on their sandcastle. He was seeing mankind united in rebellion against him. He divided that. Now what we have through globalism, through cancel culture, through all of this is an attempt to cancel anybody who's not going to speak the language of the tower, and to push us and funnel us all into this same new structure that's being built through cultural Marxism and globalism, so that we would get in line and really get to the point to where, all areas of conflict or dissension based upon faith are stamped out and silenced, and this new thing can arise from within.
So in simplistic terms, there's three demos. There is the statist patriarchy that has to force down this religious, you're describing a religion, down on people. And so they are the power brokers that really want to stay in power. Then you have the unbelievers, that would be you and me, and hopefully a growing many more. But then there's a group of people, this third demo, they're born into this culture. As Paul was saying in Ephesians 4, verse 17, that they're futile in their thinking, they're darkened in their understanding. I don't use the word victim hardly at all, because it's really a dangerous word, but I'm going to use the word apostle, so I'm going to use the word victim here and then caveat it. But there's a victimization that they're born into this culture. First, they're unregenerate, and two, the indoctrination of this religion that the patriarchy is, the governmental patriarchy is pressing down on them. All right. So in communicating to them, how would you communicate to the patriarchy who has just ungodly agendas? And then how would you communicate to those who are born in this and cannot think any other way? I mean, they don't know another way to think.
Yeah, I think that let's start with the second one first, and that is, and I'll offer two resources for. I'm sure we'll have some leaders and ministers and things that are watching this, or parents out there. I actually worked on a book with Dr. George Barna and a handful of other tremendous thinkers that is called Helping Millennials Thrive. And when the average person thinks of millennial, they think of somebody who's in school right now, and those aren't millennials, that's Gen Z. And millennials are the ones that oftentimes have kids in school. I'm kind of the oldest of the millennials, or the youngest of Gen X is where my age falls in at, my early 40s, really pushing towards my mid 40s here. And so that would be a great book for people. A buddy of mine, Jason Jimenez, just released a book called Parenting Gen Z. That would be a great resource for people as well. But I think that we have to recognize, we have to find ways to recognize the validity and the intentions of this new generation and people kind of born within this worldview. For instance, if you have a child that's very passionate about the environment, you have to show them that it's not a collision. That's not a collision course with Christianity. But there is a false version of that, and there is a true version of that. How, the Bible says there's a way to prosper that's not of God. There's a way to hold on to these ideologies that are skewed and been obscured from the truth. And so, I would go to that child and I would really work with them on going, if you have avenue and access, able to disciple them, really affirming, hey, I love that you care about this so much, and I love your passion. Let me show you in Scripture where the Apostle Paul, when he still went by Saul, was so zealous, and all the conflict that he created in Jerusalem that they had to sneak him out of the city because it was getting so bad. And then it says the church enjoyed a time of peace afterwards, because he was using his zealousness in such a way that was actually disruptive, and later matured through that. Let me show you where God, created this world and has given it to us to govern, to manage, to have dominion over, to be good stewards of. And let's talk about the differences between that and what the world has to offer in this expression. Same with, when you look at some of the issues with sexuality and I mentioned Walt Heyer earlier and sex change regret, that this is a, so much of this is based on trauma. There's so much trauma in this generation that they don't know how to act. They don't know how to get through it. And the world is giving them things that they can utilize to mask that trauma by certain affirmations and certain, ideals. And it seems to be the Band-Aid they're looking for, but it's not the true solution. We have to take them to Scripture and help them see God's solution for the trauma in their life, Christ's solution for the trauma in their life. On the other side of this, what do we say to the state, to the powers that be? I think that, we have to look at examples in church history. I think of people like Justin Martyr, who, offered defenses of the faith to Caesar, basically imploring them to take a different look at Christians, to show, look, Romans 13 is used against Christians to try to get them to behave in all situations. But it's not the only thing the Bible has to say about Christians in government. We see all sorts of examples of civil disobedience, from the first pro-life group in history, which was the Hebrew midwives that saved Moses, to Daniel when he's praying, when he's told not to, Peter and John when they continue preaching after they've been in prison and beaten. We see those examples all the time. We have to be able to issue, I think, statements to unbelievers in the world that don't know Christ, that are in power, to be able to explain to them in terms that they can understand, even if they don't come to know Christ through that we can at least defend the intention, the morality, and I would say the superiority of Christianity as a faith. And I don't mean that in a way that we lord that over anybody or we think highly of ourselves, but that Christianity in and of itself is the only faith that really can bring liberation to people, that can bring, solutions for the issues of the world. And I think that, it's easy to make those arguments, but few are doing it today, or I should say not enough people are doing it today.
What's your perspective on being harsh and unkind and shaming from the Christian world or the conservative world, getting our message? I'll just use X as an example, our cyberspace dumpster fire. What's your perspective on that harshness from the Christians? And it's almost like we're meeting fire with fire, and maybe that's the motive behind it. Let's just talk to them the way they talk to us. Yep. Where are you at on that?
So it's interesting, Twitter, X, whatever we want to call that. It's my smallest platform on social, and I think it's because I struggle to get into the fray at the level of, conflict that I see exhibited so often in the world. And my personal view, and now I'm much stronger in my books. My books are the kind of the place where I've been a lot more direct on that. I have no problem being strong on those things. There are times that we have to speak against Alexander the Metalworker, to bring back, earlier conversation. But I think that there are ways in which that Christians have taken notes from what I would call either immature conservative Christians or immature conservatives who are Christians, or we've taken notes from godless conservatives of how to push back against progressivism and the Democratic Party and the left and Marxism and all these things. We've taken cues from them, and we've actually embodied their style more than we've inspired them to follow our method of dealing with these things. Good. And the flip side of that is there are Christians who are just they are using Christianity as a justification for weakness, for timidity, for not getting in the fight, an excuse on why they don't get in. And that's wrong too. And so there's always that balance, and it's situational a lot of times. Jesus called people whitewashed tombs. He called them vipers. He called them serpents. There's a place for that. But I think that we have to do it in such a way that we never destroy somebody's dignity in the process. That's not the intention. The intention is to win them over. When that can't be done, we have to, though, still speak out in a way that protects others that might be led astray.
Yeah, when he turned the tables over in the temple, as we like to say, righteous anger. But there were people that right after that scene, they came up to him. They weren't afraid of him. They saw
Yes.
something redemptive in him.
Yeah.
And so he was not a polarizing figure in that way. He was only polarizing to those who had no interest for what he had.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you for your time. I want to give you just a quick lightning round. Just got a couple of minutes left. And so why should someone read Woke Jesus?
If I can say this humbly, I believe it to be the definitive work on understanding wokeism, its implications on the church, and what we can do about it.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know. I wouldn't read it at all. I'm not even sure why I written the book. I mean, obviously, that's when I promote my books. It's like, what do you want me to say here? Obviously, it's a good book. I want you to read it.
When I don't want to over spiritualize it, but when I read Woke Jesus, I am thankful that the Lord kind of put those words in me, and again, not trying to over spiritualize that more than what it sounds like, but that I'm blessed by it, and I think the stories I'm getting back from people have been so encouraging of helping pastors, church leaders, Christians, of all kinds, really be able to navigate these issues that they're facing today, because most people are not hearing it from the pulpit.
Right, and it's not just culturally relevant for today. It is, but there's also a historical aspect of this book that will be beneficial to so many people. All right. So what is the American Pastor Project, and why should someone sign on?
So the American Pastor Project really came out of the success of my last two books. And what I found as I traveled the country speaking and doing media tours and everything else was that there was a lot of people that still were struggling to find a church near them that was standing up in the pulpit, either promoting a Christian view of these issues or standing against the false ideology of these issues. And so we launched the American Pastor Project as an initiative of the Influence Network. And essentially it starts at AmericanPastorProject.org, where pastors, church leaders, anybody, anybody who has a Christian show, ministry, we define pastor pretty broadly. Worship pastor, could be somebody who writes kids curriculum, a Christian journalist would even qualify. Anybody who touches Christian doctrine at any level, we want them to take this stand, to make a commitment, to join with us, to basically promote historical Christianity, Christian orthodoxy, and to stand against wokeism, globalism, LGBT doctrines, all these things within the church. And we have about 500 plus signers right now that have already joined with us. And we are actually populating a map of churches around the country that people can go to, that they can look at this map, find a church near them. And I always say it's a great tool. If you're not sure where your pastor stands, then take them to the website and see if they'll sign it. And you're going to find out real quickly if your pastor's woke or not.
Yeah, I have signed it, and we will have these links in the show notes here so that people can get to these various Woke Jesus, this particular website, but also lucasmiles.org.
Awesome.
I think you're brilliant. I think you're well studied. I think you're well versed in the scripture. God has given you the ability to articulate. I think you're a gift to the church. I think you're an example for people to follow. And I would just encourage people to check out the website, get the book, Woke Jesus, and then also check out this statement at the American Pastors Project. And then see if you can get Lucas to come to your place to speak. I'm sure he's quite busy. He probably has 50 more slots out of his, he can add to his 250 interviews that he does.
So I got all the time in the world. We'll make it happen.
Nothing but time. But I do want you to check out these resources. What would be two books that you would also recommend? This is the last question, that you would also recommend to continue to study and become well-versed in this cultural battle that we're in?
I have the benefit of knowing a lot of people in this business, and so and you kind of said the title of one of them right there. Jim Garlow's book, Well Versed, is a tremendous read. It's very approachable. It's a great small group study. We've used it within our ministry. Covers a lot of these issues. I think Eric Metaxas's book, Letter to the American Church, is a great companion piece, easy to read, but really hits home. I mean, it's a home run on this topic. And then I got a buddy, I actually have this on my desk right now. We didn't plan this, but a buddy of mine, Jason Jimenez, just wrote Hijacking Jesus. And
Okay.
the subtitle there is How Progressive Christians Are Remaking Him and Taking Over His Church. We both have read each other's books. They're great companion pieces together, and are going to give you different information on kind of the same topic.
Lucas, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time. Very gracious of you. Please check out the show notes to this interview. You'll find a lot of links that will take you to all the places that you need to go. God bless.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.